Welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and I'm glad to be joined by Paul Brody, EY's global blockchain leader. Paul, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Yonah.
Now, Paul, first off, it seems like in today's day and age, there are such, crazy titles. There's, the CEO, the CTO, how did you get the global blockchain leader? That seems like such a straight to the point and descriptive and great title. Did you have to request that especially?
Yeah, I kind of did. I mean, in theory, actually, my original title at EY was Principal and Global Innovation Leader, Blockchain. And that was like too much, right? And I'm a principal. Principals are partners who are not accountants. And so technically, I think my correct title is officially Principal and Global Blockchain Leader. And I sort of became the Global Blockchain Leader over the last few years because what started out as kind of a bit of a small part-time project pretty quickly grew into a full-time job. And we did something really unusual at EY given our history, which is our blockchain business is integrated across our service lines, so tax, audit, business consulting, and it's integrated across all the geographies. So Global Blockchain Leader seemed like a simple, clear way to describe my job.
Well, good for you. I love it. Maybe one day I could also gain a title as good as that one. And you hit on an interesting point there where you mentioned how a partner who's not an accountant. EY historically is an accounting firm. Was it tough for them to sell them and to integrate the traditional EY onto blockchain, or does blockchain actually a perfect fit for an accounting firm?
It's a very good fit, and I would say, although there's definitely people, there's a lot of what I would call like the old guard skeptics. Overall, I would say the accounting, or really the assurance side of the business, has been incredible in its embrace of blockchain. That's where it got its start. It's actually the biggest part of our business. We have over 130 clients. I mean, especially our assurance business is just on fire. They have been incredibly generous in pouring money into it. It's been really amazing kind of watching that come together. And when I first got here, people are like, oh, don't spend too much time with those accounting people. They're super old school. They don't like technology. Don't bother yourself with them. And, that definitely turned out not to be true. Like I'm thrilled with it. And there's a secret silver lining to the accounting business. There's lots of things that companies can do that are optional. You can implement an ERP system, you can do a system transformation, you can do all kinds of stuff if you need to, if you want to. But your audit, your financial statement audit, you must do that every year. And so it makes accounting and auditing a very reliable recurring revenue business. And that is a good thing to have in the middle of a pandemic and a global recession.
For sure. Now, you've been at EY, I believe, for 3 years or so, and you correct me if I'm wrong, right?
5 years. 5 years. Actually.
5 years. Wow. Okay, you've been at EY for 5 years. Before that, you were at IBM, and IBM for those who don't remember, aka before my generation, IBM was the place where engineers want to go. IBM is the top. But before there was Google and before there was Facebook, so. Kind of how was it going from an IBM, tech-focused location to now being the blockhead sphere of this cutting-edge technology in EY?
It was both exciting and a little bit scary. I went to IBM because I wanted to become what I would call adult supervision. I realized at a certain point that I was never going to become the CEO of a hyper-growth startup unless I was either one of two things. I was either the founder or I was brought in one day as adult supervision. And so I went to IBM thinking, well, I'm probably not going to be a founder, so I want to learn how to be grown up. I want to learn how to be a business grown up in a technology business. And I feel like I did that. It's funny, actually, because halfway through my time at IBM, I left to start a company, it failed, and I came back to IBM. So I ended up a founder. But anyway, but when I came to EY, it's a non-technology business, and the thing I missed two things about IBM, which I've tried to bring. First of all, IBM was long before a lot of other companies a globally integrated enterprise, right? We didn't think about. I ran the global electronics industry, and we didn't think about oh, it's really just Korea or it's really the Netherlands. We thought about kind of the global industry. So I wanted to bring a global perspective. And then the second thing was I missed the rocket scientists. I missed being the stupidest, least engineering capable person in the room. And so one of the great rewards, one of the best things, and what's been made me so happy at EY is the investments that we've gotten to hire people that are truly brilliant at math and software development.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said you've been there for 5 years, and this technology is very, very young and very, very new with crazy innovations happening. What has been the shift from when you first got there to now in terms of enterprises' interest into blockchain?
So we are going through all the classic signals of the hype cycle, right? The up, the peak of inflated expectations, down to this kind of the trough of disillusionment and back up, right? And when I first, about 4.5 years ago, went in front of EY's Global Executive Committee and said, we need to invest in this as a proper business, I showed them the Gartner Group hype cycle slide from 2002. I showed it to them and I said, listen, I want you to look at every single item on this slide, right? And look at how now, if you look back on it, there's stuff that was at a peak of inflated expectations. There was stuff that was down at the bottom as like, it's terrible, it'll never work. Notice how you use all of those things, like literally every day, right? Biometric ID, electronic payments, geolocation tracking, right? If we want to be in this business, you need to understand that right now we're on the hot cycle. We're in this upward phase. And at some point in the next few years, you're going to read a bunch of articles in the paper about how stupid and pointless blockchain is. You need to ignore all of that because 10 years afterwards, it's not going to matter. And this whole hype cycle compression thing the whole hype cycle has been hugely compressed by global events, right? We went to the up. Now we went to the down a couple of years ago, and then the global pandemic just sort of put all kinds of technology work under pressure, and there's this now upward acceleration again. And the thing that makes me really happy about where blockchain is that as we start this rapid acceleration up, it's mature enough now, it has had time to mature so that we have solutions to sell for clients that are not just feeding the hype. They're not just you have a blockchain and that's because you wanted to have something cool. And so that part is very exciting, but the hype cycle never goes away and companies are very subjected to that. They can be easily swayed by those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you find that it's kind of a tough sell because, when you go to, someone, an early adopter of crypto, you go to someone, a Bitcoin lover, and you say, hey, I have this new technology. It's amazing. It's decentralized. The governments can't touch it. There's no one could control it. You're able. It's unanimous. It's trustless. It's transparent. Everyone can see what you're doing. These are things that appeal to someone who's a little more libertarian or someone who wants to disrupt the way things traditionally go. But enterprises don't always have those same interests. Blockchains don't scale very well. They don't have very good transaction speeds. The throughput's very low. So what motivation does an enterprise have to now adopt this technology that doesn't necessarily align with their interests?
So some of the knocks that you cite on blockchain are true, but some of them are FUD and misconception that's pushed out by companies or people who have alternate solutions to sell, right? If you think about how most companies interact with each other, right? If you and I sign a business contract and I give you some product, we usually have a thing called net 30 days, right? Most companies measure their payments and transactions with each other in days. Right? And people are like, oh my God, 15 seconds, that sounds terrible. Ethereum is so slow. I'm like, dude, 30 days, the 30 and net 30 is not milliseconds, it's days, right? And so there's this huge misconception among many people that blockchains, they don't scale well. They scale amazingly. If you had gone back to the 1960s or 70s and looked at systems that today people tout as the benchmark for scalability, they couldn't handle a couple million transactions a day, never mind 50 million users with a level of privacy and security. So some of the knocks on blockchains are not fair. Some of them are, right? There's way too much transparency for companies' taste, right? And so that's been a big focus for us. And then the other thing that's really, the value prop that attracts companies is very simply the decentralization. And not because they're anti-government or anti-regulation, not for any of those reasons. Companies like the concept of truly decentralized systems because commerce is a complex multi-party transaction system. And a lot of the entities which have for the last 20 or 30 years been connecting the dots, right, coordinating complex processes, have turned out to be predatory, right? The companies that want to make these digital markets, right, and I'm not going to name any of them, but it's almost invariable that what happens is the company trying to make the market sets themselves up as a central intermediary. And before you know it, they've gone from nicely connecting the buyer and seller to looking at your email traffic, your message traffic, your purchasing, figuring out whether they should be selling what you sell, changing constantly the terms and conditions of the agreement, monetizing their monopoly power in the network, right? Those things are really scary. And so for companies, the ability to have complex coordination, shared business logic, shared facts, without the threat that you're going to wake up some day and find that you're just a minor player in somebody else's digital ecosystem, that's the value proposition. Because technically, from a functionality standpoint, anything that you can do on a blockchain can also be done better, faster, and cheaper in a centralized system, provided you don't mind giving up all of your future business and power to the operator of that centralized system.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that this big issue of that it's too much transparency for some companies. So do you see the future of enterprise blockchains merely being private blockchains?
Oh, no. I see the future of enterprise blockchains. And we are at EY, we're our passion. And I don't know if you're just trying not to push my buttons, but our passion at EY is enabling public blockchain, right? And so the thing that we have been, the biggest change in the last 4 or 5 years is we have always known that we wanted to make public blockchains work. And what we have struggled with over and over again is how do we do that without causing enterprises to lose privacy from their competitors? And that's been our big investment. I believe that we now know how to do that properly. And so that's going to lead to what I believe is kind of a huge renaissance of enterprise involvement in public blockchains.
What is that key? Is that key zero knowledge proofs? Does zero knowledge proofs not, fix all or a major part of the problem?
Zero knowledge proofs, whether they're snarks or starks or some of the other stuff that people are developing, they are the key to preserving the consensus algorithm and the level of decentralization without giving up privacy. And so what we've been working on is kind of maybe 3 things that are really important in that respect. Number 1, I want to have private transfers and payments. Number 2, I want to have private shared business logic, right? It's no good if my payment to you is a secret, but everybody can read our contract, right? That's kind of pointless. And number 3, I want to have regulatory compliance. Our goal isn't anonymity. It's not money laundering, right? There's tools out there for that if that's your thing, right? Our goal is the maximum level of competitive privacy consistent with regulatory compliance. And we are now there. The work that we're doing around the baseline protocol, the Nightfall and Nightlight solutions that we've deployed, those support privacy with regulatory compliance in both transfers, payments, and business logic.
And which blockchain right now, the protocol, do you see is the closest to achieving that, or the easiest to build upon, to add on to in order to fulfill all those goals?
So right now, it's the Ethereum public blockchain. Right, and I say that with great care because I don't want to get sucked into a big debate about which blockchain is better. There's always something better, right? I have a joke I tell, which is I don't know which method of transportation was better than the wheel, but somebody must have come up with something better than the wheel because we use the wheel, right? There's just we never ever use the best available technology. That's just how it is, right? And as imperfect as the internet is, as imperfect as SMTP and FTP and HTTPS are, right? Ethereum is the same. It's an imperfect solution, but it's the solution that has by far the most users and the most developers. And so that is the one that we have chosen to build upon. And when you're trying to build an organization and you want to build great software, you're not going to do it on 20 different platforms. You're going to do it by being focused and doing a small number of things very well.
And does it concern you and the clients who, who hope to use this technology, that even before everyone's on board, Ethereum network is already congestion, very high fees, very low. The network is congestion. There's no better way to say that. Is that a fear, for you guys and for potential enterprise clients? Not necessarily the fees, because I guess the fees, they don't mind the fees, that they can afford it.
They mind the fees. Let's be clear. Enterprises it's that old joke, like, why are people rich? It's because they're cheap, right? Same thing for enterprises.
So then how do you get by that? Are they not saying, whoa, we bought you, you sold us, we were all in on those pros, but wait a second, this thing can't even scale, when just crypto early adopters are using it. How's it going to scale when enterprises are on it?
So that's a very effective kind of FUD message that we get all the time, which is, what are you going to do about scaling? The answer is there's a ton of things that are going on around scaling. And I didn't set out for this to be the case, but it turns out that sort of batching using zero knowledge proofs turns out to be one of the key tools for scaling. So back in December of last year, when we unveiled our newest version of Nightfall, we had compressed, basically, we had gotten it to drive the cost down for private transactions. We'd gotten it up to 20 transactions in a block. Now, going back to December, the network wasn't very congested at all, right? In fact, it was consuming barely half of its available capacity. So what we did was we laid out, we have a technical roadmap. We have a mathematical roadmap to go from 20 transactions per batch to north of 2,000. And what we said was, we're going to leave the 20 at the moment because there are other priorities we have in terms of improving the quality of private business logic, adding regulatory compliance tools. But we suspected that we would have to come back to this batching thing and add capacity. And so I expected that both ourselves and many others are working on capacity additions going forward. So during the growth of this network, we're going to have these moments where capacity spikes, demand spikes, kind of gas prices spike, and that will prompt people to sort of go and implement the next phase of their solution or the next kind of chunk of scalability tools, and then we'll move on from that. But again, people keep holding out sort of impossibly high standards of systems that have 30 years of maturity and predictable demand and saying, what, you can't do that? It's going to come.
Mm-hmm. And when you guys first started, Ethereum was proof of work, still proof of work. With the goal of going to proof of stake, do enterprises care how their technology works, or just that it works? Do they care the consensus model?
They do. They care about the consensus model, but mainly because of the carbon footprint, right? When we talk to a number of our clients, they say, I'd like to do more blockchain. I had some reservations about the carbon footprint. And so the shift from proof of work to proof of stake means Ethereum already has a lower carbon footprint than Bitcoin, but the shift to proof of stake means an even further reduction. And I think that turns out to be a much greater concern than the mechanics of the math, right? They do care about the consequences. They care about some of the people care very much about the details, right? And they absolutely passionately care about and are very interested in diving into the privacy details, because privacy and security tend to be at the very top of the gating factors for enterprises.
Mm-hmm. Now, part of that decision, that proof of work to proof of stake, these are not the decisions made by the enterprises. These are decisions made by the community, the miners. Does it not scare enterprises to kind of have so little control over the future of this infrastructure that they're going to rely on? I mean, one day they could wake up, there's a giant fork, the blockchain has went in a direction that right now it might be going in the direction of a smaller carbon footprint. Maybe tomorrow they decide to go in a bigger carbon footprint. Does it scare the enterprises for once in their lives to have so little control over the infrastructure?
That's another one of those things. And I remind people, the internet functions the same way. It was very interesting. Carmine DeCibio, who is the chairman of EY, back in January, he was on a CNBC interview, and they sort of, I feel like they sort of surprised him with this question of, well, like, doesn't it scare you, public networks? And, you know, at first it wasn't clear that they were talking about blockchains, but, you know, with all tough questions, you always think of the clever comeback later. But the answer is, you know, the internet's like that. Companies don't control the internet, right? There's a broad user community. They have enormous influence, right? And, you know, we are earning a seat at the table with the Ethereum Foundation, with the Ethereum community, the enormous amount of code, the investment that we've made, the fact that like all of our code we have pushed into the public domain, right? Almost all of our work on research on security and privacy, we've made free and public domain, big contribution to the community. I think that earns us a credibility at the table. And to be honest, although people don't want to turn Ethereum into something that is purpose-built for enterprises and not for individual users, I've encountered little or no arbitrary hostility towards kind of the business requirements.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one of the reasons why Ethereum is so congested is because of the explosion of DeFi. And you recently wrote a piece for CoinDesk titled "Enterprises Would Use DeFi If It Weren't So Public." And I think you already explained a little bit about this idea that businesses don't want everyone knowing about their transactions. But do you believe that DeFi will ultimately be adopted by enterprises?
I sure hope so. We're building our products in exactly that direction. So one of the products that we announced back in April, and we will be releasing, I hope, kind of for public beta in September, is something called EY Option Network Procurement. And it's designed for companies to do volume purchase agreements between them and their suppliers as network activities. So you or your subsidiary or your business partner can issue purchase orders to a supplier, and a supplier can receive them, they can ship product, and they can send you invoices. Now, from the ground up, we designed this solution to be DeFi friendly. So right now, most of what's in DeFi is I have a dollar token, I can loan it to you, or I can get interest on it. What we want to do is tokenize inputs and outputs like purchase orders, invoices, asset transfers. So if you are my supplier and we sign an agreement and I send you a purchase order, that will come in the form of a token. And you should be able to take that token and go to a bank or a finance provider and say, I have this purchase order from a big company. I'd like to get some working capital. I need 30% of the value of this purchase order in order to buy the raw materials to buy this. My goal is to do two things. Number one, make sure that all of those inputs and outputs that are key are properly tokenized so that they can be transacted in the DeFi ecosystem. And number two, I want Baseline Protocol and Nightfall and Nightlight to support the DeFi protocols and the DeFi protocols to adopt this so that a company can get their financing on the blockchain without having to show any of their potential competitors what they got, who's buying, how much money they're borrowing, what interest rates they're paying. So I want DeFi for enterprises with privacy.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that the example you gave which is very interesting and very cool to see the future of business and how that works. It's interesting that you went halfway there and then you went traditional. And I'll explain what I mean. You know, you tokenize that big business order. Now the supplier has a big business order and he wants to raise capital with it. So you had him going to a bank. But why does he have to go to a bank? Isn't the beauty of DeFi that he could now take that big purchase order and go to the open market and go to everyone and say, hey, I want to raise capital. I no longer need to go to the banks. He could have went to the banks today. Today, if I'm a business, I could show my purchase order, go to a bank, and if I could convince them that it's legit, they'll give me the banking. Isn't the beauty of DeFi now that it raises this ability to raise capital to now the whole market to anyone?
No, you got me. And I should not have used the word bank. I mean any finance provider. My goal is that this whole process can happen digitally on chain, right? And if we've done our job right, we've convinced banks to be on the blockchain, to do these services on the public Ethereum network, right? At the end of the day, right, we get a lot of people who are nervous about doing this stuff, but we audit hundreds of companies that do cryptocurrency and digital asset transactions, right? No one should be thinking to themselves, well, gee, I don't know if this is legal, right? There's lots of those examples. And I'm pleased to say not a single one of our audit team are currently in prison.
Right. Well, I mean, you hit on it.
I'm worried now that will be the only quote that people will be like, EY, none of our audit team are in prison, and that'll be it. That's the only thing people will remember for this interview.
That is a great slogan for EY. I mean, what could be better?
One of my colleagues, he said, the value proposition of working with us is that you're less likely to go to prison. And I said, how much less likely?
Yeah, but hasn't that really been an issue, and has that been a factor that enterprises are still unclear about the regulatory framework for this emerging technology? I mean, even the second one regulation is put down, the technology is already innovated way past that regulation. So kind of how do you keep up? How do enterprises interact with this new technology that innovates so quickly without regulation really happening quickly? That's how regulation works.
The painful truth, and I hate to admit it, is that we don't keep up, right? So we were going through this with our tax team actually the other day, right? We have a tax tool that will calculate things like your capital gains. And we have the ability to estimate the gains or the impact or the value of things like staking, returns on staking, airdrops, and forks. But our regulatory compliance team can't really figure out what's legal, what's accepted and agreed in every case. And so, truth be told, there are smaller players in this market who offer services that we cannot, because we are just not yet comfortable with all the mechanics of the process. And I really hope we will play catch up. And I always ask regulators when I have a chance to meet with them, I say more clarity is good, because it helps us play catch up. But in the meantime, if you're a tiny startup, you can be super nimble, and B, the truth is your downside is somewhat limited, right? When you're a large enterprise like us, we have to be very risk careful. There's nothing that we do that hasn't gone through layers of approval, review by professional practice, review by audit standards committees. So the truth is we can't always be as fast or as close in this process as I would love for us to be.
Mm-hmm. And that also is something interesting, because you guys are quite large, and something inherent to being quite large. But there's a lot of pros. You have great infrastructure and great resources, but you are less nimble, and it is harder to get approval and make decisions. So what ends up happening, especially with DeFi, is there's such interesting new technologies and new financial tools and instruments. Has it happened yet that you guys are developing a product on the blockchain for your clients, and then you see something pop up in DeFi, pop up in the open market, like, whoa, this is a great idea. This works way better, and it kind of shifts the way you're working towards?
Not as much as you would have thought. I was really, really afraid of this. And one of the things that really surprised me early on in the world of blockchain is, although lots of startups are very nimble, they don't have a lot of patience. I've worked at a bunch of startups, right? I know how challenging that can be. And they don't always have the appetite for really sinking their teeth into some of the really thorny issues. And so we knew from day one, because I spent 20 years at IBM in the business of enterprise software, we knew from day one that privacy is essential for enterprises. And privacy is incredibly difficult, right? I have a team of 6 nuclear physicists, mathematicians, PhDs, generally rocket science brilliant people who do nothing but work on zero knowledge proofs for privacy applications. That is astonishingly difficult. And I kept expecting to wake up one day and find that somebody else had done a better, faster job than we had, and I haven't. So people can get product to market sooner, but they can't always get stuff that enterprises really want. And we do understand enterprises. And the other thing is that even though a startup in a particular country or region can develop something that's useful, when we deploy something, boom, it can be out in like 200 countries. And so we offer the potential for enormous scale. We can be super, super responsive and nimble in the world of public domain software and pushing out research. But when it comes to an official product from our firm, it's going to be carefully vetted, tested out, reviewed before it gets deployed.
Mm-hmm. And, I find one thing that drives me crazy, it really nuts, is we're in 2020. there's incredible technology. I'm able to send a message. I'm able to speak to you. You're in San Francisco. I'm in Tel Aviv, and we're speaking across the world as clear as day, instantaneously. It's really insane. And yet, if I want to send money to you, I could speak to you. I could communicate with you. But if I want to send even a penny or $1 or $100, it is slow. It costs a tremendous amount of money. And when I speak to financial experts about this, they say that one of the biggest costs, one of the reasons why it's so slow, is because of anti-money laundering requirements. And I'm sure that EY has to deal with this because of their accounting and cleaning up. But are you guys working with enterprises for a solution for this, to enable the transfer not only of information, not only of sound and video, but also of money and currency across borders in a quicker and cheaper way?
So we are, and we have lots of conversations about this. The truth is that there's not as many easy solutions as you would like because of the issues with money laundering, terrorist finance, right? Those are decisions that only governments can make about relaxing some of the controls or simplifying some of the process. It turns out, though, that one of the big impediments to cheap global money transfer isn't electronic. It's not that, the truth is actually you can send me money for a very small amount of money, but that's because you have a bank account and you have a smartphone and I have a bank account and a smartphone. Much of the cost, which is borne by people who can least afford to bear it, is involved in the retail end of this, right? There are large numbers of people who don't have bank accounts. They don't have legal IDs for the country they're in, or they don't have any ID at all. And so they have to go to a retail location, they have to pay in cash, and their money is transferred to another retail location, right? And the consequence of that is there's very few organizations that can do that, so there's not much competition, and the costs are much, much higher. And so, unfortunately, what sort of pains me is until those people, the unbanked and the undocumented and the unbanked, have a way to get smartphones and bank accounts, their costs are going to be higher, and you and I don't have as much power to make change for them as we would like.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think you highlight a really big point that, there is a ton of unbanked in the world, and these third world countries, they have less infrastructure. And because of that, it's kind of a chicken and egg, but because of that and contributing to that, big institutions, enterprises don't focus their markets on those, don't focus their powers and their products on those small markets. It's just too small. If I'm a big enterprise, I want to build a new product, new infrastructure, I'm focusing on the US market. I'm focusing on Japan, China. I'm focusing on big time markets. So you guys are working with enterprises and there's a tremendous amount of money and development going into this. Is there a danger or a fear that you see that, it's just going to be a repetition of what's currently happening, that the development and the funds are going towards, once again, towards first world markets, and the third world markets will be left behind again?
It's certainly possible. I hope that we won't contribute to that. My first job was I took a year off of college and I went to work at the first mobile network operator in Nigeria. And I had this vision, I had this hope that we would be delivering bandwidth and connectivity to a country of 100 million people with only 500,000 phone lines. And it took a long time, right? And it took a lot longer than I was there for, right? Those days we were selling analog mobile phones for $1,000 each, and airtime was $1 a minute. And we were getting started. And if you look back now, I can look back now and say, wow, that was a good call. That was the right thing. For all the faults of infrastructure in many kind of emerging markets, the truth is that people in sub-Saharan Africa have 3G networks and 4G networks that are as good as almost any other part of the world, right? And there are some really encouraging case examples like M-Pesa in Kenya and Tanzania, where digital money transfer and payments support the unbanked. So I really hope that blockchain and other emerging technologies like this will have a similar positive impact. The centralization of the traditional web has made the biggest companies much bigger and more powerful. I have a hope that in enabling commerce without central authorities required, that blockchains will make it possible for small and mid-sized companies anywhere in the world to do the kind of complex, coordinated commerce that only in the past their larger competitors could do. So I hope this goes towards leveling the playing field. I hope it contributes to kind of deconcentrating some of these sectors and increasing competition and distributing the rewards of digital commerce much more evenly towards the participants and less towards the centralized network operators.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you're saying that you hope these things, and there's such wonderful, desires to have. These are really great goals to have. And you are the global blockchain leader for EY, and EY was recently named as a top enterprise blockchain service provider in an annual HFS research report, which congratulations, by the way. But how does it feel to be the head of one of the front runners of an industry that's really being shaped right now? I mean, this is literally, Henry Ford at the start of automobile. This is you are shaping single-handedly. I mean, you have an incredible team, and but you are leading right now, kind of the design and the implementation of an emerging technology. Do you feel the gravity of that responsibility?
I do. I mean, you're telling me the things that I try to tell myself when I need to give myself a pep talk, right? But I really hope that what I hope is that when people look back upon what made blockchains usable for enterprises, that they will look at the work that the EY team did and the work that we put into the public domain. And I hope that when people look back at the impact that blockchains had on global commerce, that they will say it reversed a 20-year trend towards increasing centralization and increasing monopolization, right? So I want to have a big impact. I want our team and the work that we do I want us to be able to look back and say, not only was our impact large, but it was constructive, and the benefits, it drove the benefits of technology back more evenly. And I realize how, and when I say that to myself, or I hear myself saying it to you, I realize how incredibly naive I sound. I've heard people just say like, dude, what a California tech, techno optimist. And I am guilty as charged, still in that direction. And I hope that we will, each time that we go through the cycle, we won't repeat history, that we will somehow, and I love tech history. I love tech history a lot, because it is my sincere hope that we do not repeat history here, that we do a better job.
Well, the only way not to read history is to learn from it. And this is such a new technology. So what major events or emerging technologies do you look back upon in history to try to learn from? Was it the ICO boom, or is it going way back to the mention of the automobile, or is it the internet?
So there's a whole bunch, right? And certainly the internet provides like an almost eternal supply of interesting use cases and lessons, right? The way in which the open internet supplanted AOL and CompuServe, to me, is an excellent model for how I see public blockchain supplanting kind of private networks. But you can go further back than that. One of my favorite early models historically is airline reservation systems. So in the early days of technology and before modern civilization, so we're talking 1960s, 70s, IBM built an airline reservation system for American Airlines. It was called Sabre. It was the first online reservation system. In the end, that had a profound impact on the air travel market. In fact, it's one of the earliest examples. We talk about how powerful big centralized intermediaries are, like Google and Facebook and Apple and Amazon. But long before any of them were powerful, there was a time in the 1980s when the airline reservation systems were more valuable than the airlines, right? And that was because of their power of central authority. And it took a federal antitrust effort. Like if you went onto the American system and you said, I want to go from San Francisco to Chicago, it would show you the first 10 flights on American Airlines, whether or not they were the best ones, whether or not they were the best price. And it took antitrust efforts to change that. But I think if you go even further back, I'm fascinated by two even further back kind of conversations. The first is the rise of the telegraph. So the telegraph, you can think of as kind of one of the first true modern information technology systems. The telegraph grew because the railway system needed a telegraph to coordinate track usage, right? And they grew literally hand in hand in the UK. It was almost in lockstep. And one of the things that I learned from that and look back upon that is industrial revolutions almost always go hand in hand with information technology revolutions. So one of the things that I have in my mind is, will this information technology revolution we have going also go hand in hand with an industrial revolution? And then the last one that I'm just super fascinated about is the adoption of electricity. It took decades and decades and decades for companies to figure out how to use electricity, right? They kind of got it. They used to have water wheels and they made them electric, but the factories didn't change. But it took a long time for people to understand, like, electricity can have a fundamentally, you can change the factory, the way you operate your factory. If you look at the productivity statistics for the last 30 or 40 years, it's kind of hard to see. There's actually a very famous quote, and I'm forgetting who made it. So you can see evidence of computers everywhere except in the productivity data, right? And blockchain is yet another kind of computer-driven, software-driven technical revolution. And at some point, we've got to figure out how this stuff translates into productivity we can measure, or we will underinvest and underuse this technology. So I absolutely, I'm the hugest fan of technology history for this reason. And I hope not only to have a place in that maybe one day, but also to avoid all the mistakes that have been so generously furnished by others over the years.
I'm glad to know that we're all in good hands, because you are clearly a fan and learner of history. But do you ever have a fear, a little fear in the back of your head that you might do your job too good, that eventually it becomes commonplace and super easy that kind of all our transactions, even privately, all our transactions are done on a recorded ledger, and there won't be a need for an accountant? That it will all be private, but the government, using zero knowledge proofs, will be able to see all our income and all our outcome, and no need for an accountant anymore. And then there goes EY.
No, because I think, the thing that I wake up in the middle of the night sweating on is like, what if blockchain isn't actually that useful? Or what if private blockchains are really the right thing to do? That's, you want to wake me up in a cold sweat. That's what I worry about. But, the more successful technology is, the only thing it does is it keeps driving us back to the need for human judgment, right? Good record keeping doesn't prevent fraud. We have fraud, and we have crimes, and we have bookkeeping scandals, and we have all of those things, not because some accountant made a mistake. We have those things because somebody got greedy or angry or jealous. It's all driven by human emotion. The economic cycle, criminal activity, it has nothing to do with technical errors, right? People will always find new technical errors. They will always find new loopholes to exploit. The underlying thing is human nature. So until we fix human nature, until we can figure out how to make people not jealous, not angry, not greedy, right? Until we can fix that, then the value of good judgment, of trust, of integrity, those things become more valuable, right? What I do worry about is a lack of automation, or the kind of messy problems that we've had in the past. They've been a training ground for accountants and consultants and business leaders, right? You work your way up, right? And you work your way through the grunt work, and you understand how things work because once upon a time, you were sent down to the vault to count the number of boxes of X or cases of Y, whatever it was out there, right? And you're like, well, that's how it works. If we don't have that, how are we going to train? How are we going to build this flow of people who have this deep understanding of how things work? And so I do worry that if we're not careful, we are automating away the training ground that gives people this really deep understanding of how systems and technology work.
Well, I kind of want to touch upon your first part of your answer. And I agree with the second part of your answer, but I kind of disagree with the first part of your answer. because isn't that the promise of blockchain, that humans by nature could be flawed, and we don't want to have to trust them. So we built
But
a
wasn't
system where
the
you
ICO
don't.
boom? The ICO boom was all driven by greed, right? It worked technically perfectly on the blockchain, right? All those tokens, they work, right? Most of them work, right? They're ERC20s, the standards work, the technology works, but the business promise, the money that was raised, was almost all of it was fraudulent, because it was all based on a promise that could not be realized, right? And it was fueled by FOMO.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I definitely agree with that 100%. The ICO boom was a clear example of human greed taking advantage of something that could have been promising. I mean, the idea that to open up fundraising for projects to the world, and on both ends, to let small developer teams have access to capital that the VCs would have laughed them out the door, and now the other end to let the everyday person get a piece of a new prize. But clearly that was taken advantage of 100%. But with DeFi, do we have the opportunity and the potential there to kind of learn the lessons from the ICO and avoid that? I mean, I think the biggest issue with the ICO was a lack of equity. You were buying a promise, you weren't actually buying value. How do you see that solution digs up, or the problem digs up?
One of my former colleagues compared ICOs to pre-selling the frequent flyer miles in order to fund the airline, right?
Exactly.
I put a couple of beers in us, and I would say at least half of my colleagues sit around talking about how we're all terrified that the DeFi boom is it's ICOs 2.0, right? And we've gone from something clever to something ridiculous, right, in no time at all. And it's going to end badly for some people, I fear.
Mm-hmm. But even though fundamentally they're different, the ICO, you are putting money in a project, the hope that the project will build something useful, and then that token will then be somehow useful. With DeFi, you're not really betting on the people, you're betting on everything's backed by collateral. So, I mean, yes, if all the values of everything drop, but that's, you're no longer betting on
that's exactly how the real estate crisis occurred in 2008, right? Everything was built on collateral, which had an inflated value, which allowed for more lending, which drove further inflated values. The same cycle is being repeated with DeFi, where the same amount of money is circulating over and over and over again, right? And with all of these things, with every single boom, right, people built technology and structure and information that turned out to be immensely useful, right, later on. But invariably, right, human emotion drives these people to excesses of exuberance, and that usually has an unhappy ending for some people when the music stops. And I don't know how to stop that. I wish I could, because I know that there's going to be some very unhappy endings for some people, and I don't know how to stop that. So.
Well, I do think that, when it comes to the real estate bubble and, well, first of all, ICOs. With ICOs, I think there was nefarious. That was purely nefarious reason. Built on greed, but they were saying, I'm going to rip these people off. I'm going to take this money, and I'm just going to run away and not do the project. With the real estate boom and with DeFi, I don't think there's this nefarious motive. It's greed, but I don't think necessarily the greed there is nefarious. I think everyone's hoping that they're not going to be the last one holding the baton, but I don't think that they want to pull the rug from out of everyone. But one thing that actually does give me hope, and I'm not trying to be mean. I really don't want. I don't wish ill on anyone. But something that gives me hope is that when you look at the real estate bubble, 2008, Wall Street got greedy. They put all the risk in, and then when it crashed, they got bailed out, and they didn't have to deal with the consequences. And my hope is, with DeFi, I don't want anyone to lose, and I don't want anyone to be hurt. I don't want any ill intent, but my hope is at least there is responsibility. At least there is consequences for bad moves. If someone is greedy and they do take the risk, I hope they hit it big and they get the reward. But I think the way that a healthy market has to work is that those who give big risk get offered big reward, but also if that risk doesn't hit, they have to take the punishment. Do you not feel that we taking the financial market into a more decentralized way will allow for those markets to act more freely, which is kind of what we hope is a fair system for everyone.
That's such a tough question, right? I would say over the years, my view on things like this has shifted. I think 10 or 20 years ago, I was much more of a libertarian. I was sort of much more inclined to say, laissez-faire, let people learn their lesson in the marketplace. One of the things that really opened my eyes was looking at some of the research around behavioral economics. It turns out, we're not actually that good at judging risk. We make all kinds of, as human beings, we make all kinds of like wildly optimistic cognitive errors. And you combine that with the fact that oftentimes, the people who can least afford to lose their money are the ones who are left standing when the music stops. And so I think on my own personal level, if I were a regulator, I might tend towards a slightly more interventionist model where there should be sandboxes, people should be free to play, but before we unleash things on everybody, we should have some time to test things out. One of the things that I talk about a lot inside of EY is how should we think about risk? And one of the ways in which I think about it is we should take some risk, but the risks that we should be thoughtful about the risks that we want to take. And so if you think about a venture into an ICO or DeFi environment, there's two types of risks that you're taking, or maybe three types. The first type is the core technology. Does the technology work? Does it scale? Does it work reliably? Did you deploy software without bugs? Right? That is the kind of risk that we should take some of because we need to learn, right? And we won't learn in the lab. We will only learn by doing. The second thing is, do people want this, right? So we've created something. If it works, does anybody want it, right? That's also a risk that we can take, right? But there's a third type of risk I don't want to take, which is I don't want to wake up one morning and discover that one of these first two kinds of things went wrong. And then it turns out that the people we decided to work with weren't ethical and decent and willing to take responsibility and do the right thing for the others. So I want to take technology risk. I want to take market risk, but I don't want to take integrity or business partner risk, right? And I think that kind of helps us think through what we should or shouldn't do or where we can take risk. Because it's not risk we talk about generically, but there's different kinds of it. And I think you can be thoughtful about what kinds of risks you can take. I have no shame in going in front of the other EY partners and saying, we tried this and it turns out nobody wants it. Or we tried this and it turns out the technology doesn't work. But I don't want to go in front of them and say, I picked these partners, I didn't do my due diligence, and now we've been made fools of. Like, I would prefer not to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've clearly had a very successful career. You've made it to the top, and definitely in our industry. There are many students watching this. This is universities around the world are watching this. What advice would you give to kids who are interested in blockchain technology right now?
Wow. First of all, so sorry for taking up your time. I think that the advice I would take is, the advice I would offer is, first of all, learn the coding part. That doesn't mean you have to be a coder forever, but it's really good to understand how the plumbing works, right? That is absolutely essential. Secondly, kind of as you go forward, think about where you can learn, and keep in mind that your career is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And so when you think about all the different jobs you're likely to do during the course of your career, keep in mind, it can take time to get where you want to go. And then I would say, no matter what you're learning, learn some statistics. I think it's just the foundation. Learn some statistics, learn some economics, and learn some history, because we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And technology doesn't exist without good judgment, thoughtful application, that kind of thing, right? You can only spend, reputations take a long time to build, and they take even longer to rebuild. And it's not to say that you won't make mistakes, but try to make the good kind of mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And thank you so much for your time. After this hour that we've been speaking, I think you've clearly earned the title of global blockchain leader, at least in my eyes. Paul Brody, thank you so much for joining us. And for all of our viewers at home, for REIMAGINE 2020, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.